All right, let's get cooking. Welcome to the latest edition of Chin Check Sports Radio. I'm your host, JD. I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join us. And as always, we welcome any suggestions, feedback, comments, and criticisms, which improves the quality of our program, which ultimately improves your listening experience. Before we get started, we want to send all of you our thank yous for your tremendous support. People are slowly but surely finding out about who we are and what we do. They enjoy and respect the passion with which we speak. But as we continually say, we do this because we love it. We are simply sharing our passions with you all as we continue to build our listening army to take over the world. It is good to be back doing what we do. On this particular episode, we're going to begin our top 10 upsets or shocking moments in boxing history based on the fights that we saw growing up. Now, if you are a follower of Chin Check Sports Radio, you know that we love the sport of boxing. With the NFL, it is our favorite sport. I can even make an argument it's probably even our favorite sport over the NFL by just a smidge. We love boxing. We have trained it. We respect the sport. We love the sacrifices that you guys make, the immortality that they achieve. But too oftentimes, once their career is over, they are usually forgotten about. And cool, we think of the fighters like the Mayweathers and the De La Hoyas who make a lot of money post-retirement due to their promotional obligations. But we know a lot of fighters end up dying broke, they're struggling. They never made the money that they could have made in their careers. Cool, we think of our big stars, but a lot of other fighters, they come and go, never ever touch the money that the bigger name stars actually make. So for our love of boxing, we always love to do our boxing programming, especially in the NFL offseason. Now, how do we come to this list? This was something that we thought of, something that we definitely wanted to do. And when we put together these type of lists, it is not easy to do, folks. We have to go back. We have to go through our mental Rolodex, think of all the times that we were shocked watching fights, outcomes that we didn't expect, things that shocked us, things that kept us talking, things that shook up the boxing world. So, of course, now we had to think of all those fights and then condense those fights into 10. Because we can always do more, like what our favorite fighters of all time. We wanted to do an honorable mention category, but we wanted to shy away from that. We wanted to do a strictly top 10 list. And it's something that when we narrowed those fights down to the 10, and we had to use some criteria of what were the odds of the fight? What were the long-lasting effects of the fight? Did anyone think that the underdog would win that fight? How big of an upset it was? Did it go outside of boxing? So that's something that we wrestled with that, which made it even harder to actually rank these fights. So it's actually harder to rank the fights and actually narrowing down the list of the top 10 fights. But of course, like most things, it's gonna take some time, but it's fun. It's something that we enjoy doing. So we have now narrowed down our top 10 list. Believe it or not, we're still actually arranging the top 7 or 8 fights in that specific order. But of course, we're gonna do our countdown from 10 to 1. This one we're sure that ranks as number 10, and we'll tell you our reasons why. But we're literally still putting the list together as we do this first broadcast. So again, we hope you enjoy the journey, and please enjoy it with us. First up of the Chin Check Radio top 10 upsets / shocking outcomes of all time is the late Corrie Sanders KO in the second round against Wladimir Klitschko. Now, when we do these fights, we love to give you the background or the events that led up to the particular fight. When we do these fights, we love to kind of put it in a proper context and give you the history of the fight itself, what led up to the fight, how were both fighters coming into the fight, etc., etc., etc. So this fight took place March 8th of 2003. Now, that March 8th was the week after Roy Jones Jr. defeated one John Ruiz for a portion of the WBA Heavyweight Championship of the World. Now, for my old boxing fans who actually remember, whenever there was a pay-per-view fight that was given by HBO, the following week they would have a replay of the pay-per-view fight. So if you missed the action, you can catch it the following week, or if you already watched it on pay-per-view the previous week, if you wanted something to do on a Saturday night, you can rewatch the fight with a friend. And of course, they would also have a main event fight that would immediately follow the rebroadcast of the previous pay-per-view event. So that was always kind of fun, especially for you HBO fans, which is why we need HBO Boxing to come back. So March 8th, 2003, in Hanover, Germany, you have Corrie Sanders going into this fight, who was 38-2. Now, some notable fights from the career of one Corrie Sanders is June of 1993, a TKO victory in the third round against the late smoking Burt Cooper, who 2 years earlier challenged then undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Evander Holyfield, in Atlanta, Georgia, gave him a tough fight, actually scored a knockdown of Holyfield in the third round of that fight, but ended up losing in a 7-round knockout. And folks, go back and watch the third round of the Cooper-Holyfield fight, who was one of the greatest rounds of boxing history. Think of Bo Holyfield 10 along those lines. Another notable fight in the career of the late Corrie Sanders, November of 1997, a unanimous decision victory over Ross Purity. We'll get to who he is in a second. June of 1998, a TKO in the second round against former cruiserweight champion Bobby Chiz. If that name sounds familiar to you all, he was the voice of Showtime Boxing in the mid to late 90s, along with one of the Albert brothers, Steve Albert, as well as the late fight doctor, Bertie Pacheco, who was known as the late Muhammad Ali's fight doctor. Bobby Chiz, very knowledgeable in boxing. I think the last time people really heard of Bobby Chiz, he did the simulcast of the mega fight between Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson. For those of you who remember, Lewis was tied to HBO, Mike Tyson was tied to Showtime. They created a joint venture. So you had the lead broadcaster from HBO, that was Jim Lampley, along with the lead broadcaster from Showtime, that was Bobby Chiz. They got together and they were able to call the action. In February of 2000, a TKO in the first round against Al Ice Cole. In May of 2020, a TKO loss in the seventh round to future heavyweight champion of the world, Hasim Rahman, who just a year later would upset one Lennox Lewis. Now going into Wladimir Klitschko. Going into that fight, sporting a 40-1 record. Now, some notable fights in his career. Let's start with the loss to one Ross Purity, a TKO in the 11th round in Kiev, Ukraine. Now, Klitschko was clearly a better boxer than one Ross Purity. But if you go back and watch that fight, he was hit. He seemed to have gassed out. He was being hit a lot by one Ross Purity. He didn't seem to take punches well. You could tell that was really the first time that he was being hit. And he was hit a lot. He was hit often. And what people don't remember in that fight is that the corner actually threw the towel in because Wladimir was in so much trouble and was not able to defend himself. In September of 1999, now again, Klitschko has a TKO loss to one Ross Purity, who lost to Corrie Sanders. In September of 1999, a TKO in the 8th round against Axel Schultz. If you remember who Axel Schultz is the one who defeated George Foreman, in quotes, let me rephrase that, lost the fight to George Foreman, but he gave the fight to Foreman, so he gave George Foreman a very tough, competitive heavyweight championship fight. July of 2000, a TKO in the 7th round against one Monty Barrett. October of 2000, a unanimous victory over one Chris Bird. Again, Chris Bird eventually would go on to hold a version of the heavyweight championship of the world. March of 2002, a TKO in the 8th round against Francois Botha. June of 2002, a TKO in the 6th round against Ray Mercer. December of 2002, a referee stoppage in the 10th round against Jamil Big Time McCline. Now, putting this into perspective, Wladimir Klitschko, this is the time where now there's been a transition in the heavyweight division. You have older stars, established stars like Evander Holyfield, whose best days were behind him. This goes through all of his wars in the 1990s. This goes into his unification fight with Lennox Lewis in 1999. The one fight he officially lost. The first fight, which was a draw, but Holyfield clearly lost that fight. Goes into the ugly fight versus John Ruiz. So at this point, you have an older Evander Holyfield. You have an older Mike Tyson, who just a year prior lost his last big-time fight against one Lennox Lewis, and Lennox Lewis, who was a couple months now going into his final fight, who was enjoying the victory lap of his career, his masterpiece of beating Mike Tyson, which really capped off his career. So you have the top 3 heavyweights of the late 90s and the early 2000s are starting to get older. So Wladimir Klitschko was seen as the future of heavyweight boxing, and hopefully is able to muster up enough public support to possibly land a fight against Lennox Lewis, because Lewis fought his brother Vitaly in June of that year. So Wladimir Klitschko was being positioned to be the heir apparent of the heavyweight championship of the world, which he eventually did hold for a long period of time. But at this time in 2003, as you're looking for a brand new heavyweight champion, or the next in line per se, Wladimir Klitschko, he fit the bill. He had the amateur pedigree. He was a super heavyweight, came from that European boxing style, that Eastern European style. So all the cards were there for Wladimir Klitschko to now really take a leap. And now you're fighting on the main event the week after a Roy Jones fight. So you're getting that HBO pay-per-view audience. You used to hear a lot about this guy. You just started seeing him fight the Ray Mercers and the Jamil McClines. And Jamil McCline was a serviceable heavyweight himself. So again, Klitschko clearly was heavily favored. And if you actually juxtapose the two of them together, Wladimir Klitschko has a look made out of granite, chiseled, solid muscle, and Corrie Sanders literally looks like somebody who just stepped out of the crowd. Let that sink in. So going into this fight, again, this is really just seen as a stepping stone for one Wladimir Klitschko. Well, Corrie Sanders was known as possessing a powerful, just dynamite in his left hand. And the late Corrie Sanders, again, looked like somebody who literally stepped out of the crowd, where Klitschko had the wide shoulders and the muscles, and he's just chiseled out of granite, has the amateur pedigree and everything. But you saw in the first round that Wladimir was a little bit sloppy on defense. He was getting caught by Corrie Sanders' left hand. And with about 30 seconds left, as there was a clinch, as Klitschko tried the jab and they somehow get tangled up, Corrie Sanders lands a short left hook on the inside, and you see Wladimir Klitschko just drop. You see him inexplicably just drop. Wes, I remember you and I were together watching that fight, so I'm like 98% sure that we was there in my old room watching that fight together. And you see Wladimir Klitschko just drop. And it was almost like, but the right hand itself, it wasn't that hard. It just caught him on a sweet spot. Looks like on the chin or the temple. He just drops. So now at this point, Klitschko is wobbling on his feet. I believe he gets dropped again in the first round. So again, first round with about 30 seconds left. He's in serious trouble. He wobbles back to the corner. Clearly there's dysfunction, there's mayhem. Nobody is expecting this, especially so soon. Again, in a fight that he was a favorite, and even Wladimir Klitschko, being from the Kiev, Ukraine, had built a following in Germany. So clearly he was the fan favorite, and clearly there was a look of shock on his face, Vitaly's face, the trainer Fritz Adunek, And so now at this point, they have to doctor him up. He's cut and he's hurt bad. And they come out for the second round. Another straight left hand, right on the chin, drops Klitschko again. And you're like, okay, what's going on here? So we have 2 knockdowns in the first round, and pretty bad knockdowns. Staggers back to the corner. You only have a minute to try to doctor him up for him to try to get himself together. And really, you can make an argument that the fact that the knockdowns happened within the last 30 seconds, if it would have happened a minute or so, or with a minute or so left in the round, Klitschko could have been knocked out in the first round. So they come out in the second round. At this point, Klitschko's legs are not there with him. Walks into another straight left hand. He's deposited right on the seat of his pants. Now he's trying to throw. He's trying to fight his way out of it. Gets dropped again with another left hand. Clearly he's out in his speed. Clearly he's not able to defend himself. And the referee waves a fight off. You see Corrie Sanders just in jubilation. His trainer or whoever from his corner jumps inside of his arms. And folks, that was a huge upset. And as a matter of fact, it was voted the Ring Magazine upset of 2003. So that was shocking to say the least. Nobody expected this. Again, this is a Wladimir Klitschko who was seen, and it's funny, the famous line from that fight when Wladimir Klitschko was on his way to losing was the former HBO commentator Larry Merchant saying, as Wladimir Klitschko, and I quote, "The next big thing is about to become the last big bust." And those words were so apropos for that time because, again, as we mentioned, Wladimir Klitschko was seen as the next great heavyweight to take boxing into the new millennium, and he just became the last big bust in this fight. Totally rocked the boxing landscape, killed any chance of any fight possibly between him and Lennox Lewis. That fight went down the drain, and that fight was a massive upset. Now, there was another fight that Klitschko had a couple years later that was a huge upset with Wladimir Brewster. But the reason why we chose this fight over the Wladimir Brewster fight, because with the Corrie Sanders fight, nobody expected that. People chalked up the loss to Ross Purity as just, one bad night. He punched himself out. He just got tired. But this one, to watch him knocked out in 2 rounds by a guy literally who looks like he just stepped out of a crowd, was shocking to say the least. And now it was a huge upset. I don't think anybody outside of South Africa, where Corrie Sanders is from, really thought that he was going to win the fight. Everybody in the Ukraine, United States, Germany had picked Klitschko to win the fight and to win the fight easily. So that's why that fight actually made the list. I'm sure the odds of that fight was heavily in the favor of one Wladimir Klitschko. Now, what's the long-lasting impact? Very minimal. Because as we mentioned before, just years later, Klitschko again was upset by Wladimir Brewster, but Klitschko went on to have a dominant title reign for almost a decade, I believe, until he lost to now heavyweight champion of the world, Tyson Fury. So the shock value is high. I know the odds were heavily in favor of one Wladimir Klitschko. I know very few people gave Corrie Sanders a chance to win the fight. His strong left hand be damned. But again, Klitschko had the pedigree. He was an amateur fighter. So I'm sure a whole lot of people did not expect Sanders to win that fight. But the long-lasting impact was very minimal because it really didn't derail Klitschko's career. It definitely opened up questions about his chin and his ability to take a punch. But as he righted the ship, trained with the late trainer Emanuel Stewart, and had a very long title reign. So that's a number 10 fight. And for those of you who don't know, we refer to Corrie Sanders as a late Corrie Sanders because he was murdered in a robbery attempt, saving his child. So I'm sure he has his wings, and we definitely didn't want to forget about him because, again, that fight is our number 10 fight and our Chin Check Radio shocking outcomes and boxing upsets of all time based on the fights that we grew up watching. Until the next time, it's Chin Check Radio signing out.